Welcome to the show, guys. Got an exciting one here for you. We are talking about the biggest busts of 2022. Now, the reason I do this show isn't just to rip into them, which, again, is a big part of what I do, is rip into these players that crap the bed for you all season long and really screwed your fantasy teams for the people that drafted them. But it's to look at what happened. Where did we go wrong? Where did the mainstream consensus go wrong in advising you to draft these busts, right? So in this episode, we're talking about all the top busts at each position, but also looking at how it happened, right? To kind of foreshadow and foresee things that are happening for 2023 so you guys make the right decisions going into this year, guys. So again, we're gonna have some fun here, but it's more about understanding and thinking ahead. And that's what I do, guys. That's why I'm getting tons of testimonials of people saying, hey man, I crushed my league, I won. My Instagram DM is flooded. So make sure you guys are following the number one Instagram page at Fantasy Football Counselor. I'm sharing those stories on my story mode daily, guys. I'm very grateful to be able to offer you guys outside of the box, non-consensus rankings and advice that actually helps you guys win your leagues. That's what I do, guys. That's what the 60 rounds draft solution does. That comes out in May. And that's what this channel does, guys. I'm really here to help you guys win. So today's focus, though, really is just going through every position here, the top four positions. Obviously, there's only four. I'm not going to really talk about defense here, but talk about the guys that were busts at each position and kind of discuss why, kind of what happened. So open discussion here, having some fun. Now in the comments below, let me know who your award is for the biggest bust of the season. And at the end of this show, I'm going to tell you guys who I think is the biggest bust for Fantasy Football 2022 as we now start completely moving over and making the shift to 2023 Fantasy Football. All right, guys, if you're new to the channel, make sure you guys are subscribed. In the comments below, who is your biggest bust for Fantasy Football 2022? Drop it in the comments below, all right? And, of course, give this video a thumbs up. It really helps the channel. I appreciate it. Smash that thumbs up. Takes a second of your time. All right, let's start off with the quarterback position. And I'm going to take ownership where ownership's due. I'm going to tell you guys which players, I was high on and that busted, right? Just didn't do well. And I would say the biggest bust at the quarterback position, there's a couple here. Dak Prescott didn't have the best year. Mind you, he didn't play the whole season. He played 12 games. Russell Wilson, I think, 225 fantasy points, 16 touchdowns, 11 interceptions, 16th in fantasy points. This is a guy that, throughout his career with the Seahawks, was always a consistent fantasy producer. This is a guy that could finish top 5, every year if he wanted to, right? He's a good scrambling quarterback. He gets yards on the ground. He produces touchdowns. He produces yardage, not yardage on a super high level, but he gets enough yardage to be efficient enough to be a top 5 quarterback when you combo that with his rushing yards, rushing touchdowns. This year just did not get it done. Absolutely did not get it done. And it's, to my surprise, because I had him, I told you to draft him as a backup with some upside. The upside was there. He had the weapons. Judy, I know he has had years to wow us. We're not wowed, but he was a young top prospect rookie a couple years ago. He had Sutton. He had his weapons. Javonte Williams went down early. He had some strong weapons going into the season, new fresh offense. He was focused. I heard he was staying overtime, after practices, focused. He had his own office at the Bronco Stadium. This is a guy that literally was set to have a great year. I just completely busted. So I'm going to have to say, without even diving too much into the other guys, that Russell Wilson's the biggest disappointment at the quarterback position for fantasy. All right. We expected more. The Broncos expected more. That's why they paid him $1 billion to be on their team. I don't even remember the price. I don't know what it was. 250 million, 300. You got to go look at the contract deal with Russell, but this is a guy that obviously the Broncos believed in. A lot of people believed in the fans. Seahawks fans were concerned that they're losing their franchise guy. And then he goes and busts in reality and fantasy. So big time bust there. I would say even Kyler Murray, due to the injury, big disappointment to a lot of people. Finished 18th amongst quarterbacks. You can make an argument for Matt Ryan as a backup. 27th amongst quarterbacks, 155 points, 12 games. And Stafford, a guy that, again, this is about projecting things and seeing before they happen. And I told you, avoid Cooper Kupp and Stafford. They came off the Cinderella year where Stafford was always a decent quarterback in Detroit. Comes in, they get the stacked team, they win the Super Bowl. And I said that they're going to have a Super Bowl hangover. And Stafford completely busted. And going into that season, there was talk about Stafford actually being banged up. his shoulder or elbow was bothering him. He had some issues going into the season. So Stafford, a big time letdown. But again, that was to be seen, and you got to look for this stuff, right? Again, with Russell Wilson, completely unforeseen. I mean, you could make an argument that Russell Wilson was going to a team where it's a new team, right? When quarterbacks make that transition, it's like, oh my God, new team, new offense. Like, how are they going to adjust? And sure enough, he didn't do well. So again, there could be arguments made there. So I would say Russell Wilson's the biggest bust at this position. Derek Carr, 17th amongst quarterbacks. Dak Prescott, 19th. Didn't have the great season. Mac Jones, disappointment, 22nd amongst quarterbacks in fantasy points. So a lot of letdowns, guys, this year at the quarterback position. And one of the main focuses that I say is like, hey, man, let's focus on anchoring a team with an ace quarterback, but also you don't want to pay too much, right? I'm all about anchoring my team with a Mahomes or Allen. The problem with that is you're giving up a super early draft pick, and that's a decision you got to make. Again, there's tons of depth still at the quarterback position. So those are your quarterbacks. Let me know if I'm missing anybody that jumps out at you that really busted. Again, Kyler, Dak, not the greatest seasons. Obviously, Russell Wilson. All right, let's move on to the running back, the sacred running back position, one of my favorite positions. And this is where, you know, you've got some candidates for biggest bust this year. It's got to be at the running back position because there's high expectations. Obviously, a lot of guys did not perform where they needed to be. Even a guy like Dalvin Cook who finished 11th. Now, I'm pulling up PPR numbers. 11th in PPR, 237 points. Round up, 238 points. Now, even a guy like Dalvin Cook finished 11th. This is a guy that was being drafted as a top 3, top 4 overall pick. Finished outside the top 10, right? Stevenson, Ramondre Stevenson finished 7th, right? Pollard finished 8th. Aaron Jones, Joe Mixon ahead of him, right? So you can see here, even Josh Jacobs, who was drafted in the 3rd round, finished 3rd amongst running backs, right? So a guy like Dalvin Cook, even though he finished 11th, still busted on his ADP and didn't finish the season. Ended up getting hurt the last game. So, you know, just when you think Dalvin Cook's going to finish the season, he tears up his knee or whatever happened. He left the game in the last game. Maybe he came back for a drive, left again. Either way, Dalvin Cook did not finish the season, even though it was last second. Yeah, it's terrible. You cannot trust that guy to finish the season. Yet the mainstream had him as a top guy. But when we're talking biggest bust, we got to take a look, and we have to seriously talk about Jonathan Taylor here as the biggest bust of fantasy football 2022. Now, this is a guy, if you got my 16-round draft solution, I was preaching Derrick Henry for a bounce back year coming off the injury. I was telling you, Taylor's not going to repeat the numbers. The last time a running back finished 2 years in a row, and I keep repeating this number because history tells us things. It gives us trends. It gives us a lot of information, right? So Priest Holmes, 2002 and 2003 seasons, was the only running back to repeat 2 years in a row as a top running back in fantasy points. Prior to that, a running back has not gone 2 years in a row on top as a running back, right? So again, we see this trend now. Eckler, top running back this year in PPR fantasy points, 372. The mainstream sheeps are already telling you draft Eckler as the first overall pick, knowing that history shows us. Not only that, Eckler's had 2 phenomenal years for a guy that sucked his first couple years in the league. So he's had 2 anomaly years. There's no way lightning is going to strike 3 times, right? There's no way. I called it with Cooper Kupp, and injuries do count. I said Cooper Kupp's going to go down, or something's going to happen. He's not going to finish on top as a wide receiver. I called it with Taylor. I'm calling it again. Eckler will not finish as the number 1 running back next year, period. He's not going to do it. So there's no reason to draft him as a top running back. And the main argument I always get is like, Joe, he's still going to finish as a top 5. Maybe, but we saw this. And again, I always go to this example. Michael Thomas had this amazing year. I think it was 2019. In that 2020 year, everyone's like, Michael Thomas is the first wide receiver. He got hurt, completely busted. Same thing with Taylor here, right? Finishing 33rd amongst running backs here, guys. 33rd. All right. He only played 11 games, only had 4 touchdowns on the ground, 861 yards, completely opposite of what he did the year before. Now you could say this year, well, I'm not going to go Taylor first overall, but I'm going to get him mid first round. Yes, very possible, but you can see the decline here. Injury happens, new offense, things change. You know, the offensive schemes change. So when you look at a guy like Taylor, you're like, oh man, you know, this going into this year, it's like, yeah, you know, I'm tempted to draft as a first overall because he finished on top last year. Not the case. And that's why, you know, he gets the bust. I would say Okay, we're going to wait on this, but I would say he is an honorable candidate here for the bust of the year. DeAndre Swift finishing 21st amongst running backs, 191 points, 14 games. This is a guy that everybody told you is a top 8 running back in PPR. He definitely gets a consideration here for the bust of the year. Other guys that could be a bust of the year, guys, again, drop it in the comments. Cam Akers was drafted in the 3rd round. He gets a consideration for a bust of the year. Cam Akers absolutely crapped him at 35th amongst running backs, guys, in fantasy points. Absolutely terrible. And there's more, guys. There's tons more here. Breece Hall, yes, injuries count. I loved Breece Hall. I take ownership on this. Breece Hall was in a position to thrive. He was doing well prior to the injury, and he was coming off. I got him as in the 3rd round. Okay, tons of value there. But again, this is why I say robust or bust. Go robust RB. Load up on those running backs and make sure you have depth because running backs do go down. We saw this, okay? Again, Taylor, Swift are the big 2 here. You could make an argument for Breece Hall, but the expectations for Breece Hall weren't as high because everybody had Taylor as number 1 and they had Swift at number 8. So again, in the comments below, guys, let me know. And again, at the end of the show, I'm going to give you guys my final verdict on who is the bust of the year, all right? Let's move on to the wide receiver here. A lot of disappointment at the wide receiver position. Mike Evans finishing 17th amongst wide receivers. Came alive in your fantasy championships. Cooper Kupp finishing 22nd. This is a guy that everyone told you to draft 1st overall, told you to avoid him. Saved you guys the 1st overall pick if you listen to this channel. If you listen to other channels, they're copying and pasting. They told you Cooper Kupp. You probably had a really rough second half of the year with your 1st overall pick. Big time disappointment was Cooper Kupp. And yes, injuries do count. Other guys that were disappointment. Juju finished 27th. Big time disappointment. Allen Lazard. I told you guys, Lazard, years to wow us were not wowed. Stashed Christian Watson. Now, Christian Watson had a rough start at the beginning. Came alive near the end. Middle to end. And then at the end kind of fell off. But either way, Christian Watson, I thought, drafted early draft capital. Young, dynamic, speedster, most athletic guy on the team. Took a while to get Rodgers' trust, but when he came alive, he did, and Lazard actually busted, and everyone was drafting Lazard ahead of Christian Watson. Now, mind you, Lazard finished ahead of Christian Watson. Christian Watson finished 39th, but he was more of the wide receiver 1 down the stretch of the season. So, and Lazard now getting, going to be not on the team after this year with the Packers. So, again, years to wow us were not wowed. That's how I look at it, guys, with a guy like Allen Lazard, right? Other guys, let me know, guys, who is the bust? Brandon Cooks had a terrible year, right? Let me know in the comments who was a big-time bust for you. Darnell Mooney, big-time disappointment, a guy that I thought would be great value, ended up getting hurt and just wasn't connecting with Fields. Fields is a guy that runs the ball a lot, and it just didn't work out for a guy like Mooney this year. Tons of talent, tons of opportunity, didn't get it done. So let me just try to see who the bust here is. Chase Claypool, terrible year. DeAndre Hopkins, he didn't get going till, he was suspended, didn't get going till later, had a bad year finishing, 46th amongst wide receivers. Again, we weren't expecting much out of him, not playing the full season. But Keenan Allen, 10 games, big time disappointment, finished 40th amongst wide receivers, a guy that was drafted super high and very disappointing. Deebo Samuel, 36th amongst wide receivers. Again, I told you Deebo would decline as well because you're looking at a guy that was really touchdown heavy last year. And I said that you can't look at these numbers because they were inflated because he was getting a lot of rushing touchdowns. A lot of rushing touchdown inflated last year. And again, we see it this year, guys. Only 3 rushing touchdowns compared to last year. What do you have, like 8 to 10 or something like that? But either way, Deebo Samuel, big time disappointment, big time bust. So, I mean, you could make an argument that he's the biggest bust of the year because everyone expected to be super high on him, right? He was 2nd, 3rd round pick this year, right? So a lot of disappointment at the wide receiver position. This is why I tell you guys, you can wait at wide receiver. You can get a ton of value. Look at Amon-Ra St. Brown finishing 7th, right? Devontae Smith, 8th. Jalen Waddle, 9, right? CeeDee Lamb, 5. You got Christian Kirk just finishing outside the top 10, 11. Amari Cooper, 12. Tyler Lockett, 13, right? You got guys that were being drafted super later in drafts that ended up actually doing really, really well. So again, tons of depth at that wide receiver position. Cooper Kupp busting, and he could get an award. 22nd amongst wide receivers. He could get the award for biggest bust this year. But again, we're almost thinking Taylor's the guy. So again, in the comments below, let me know after this conversation, who is the bust of the year. Now, again, tight end, what you see is kind of what you get. You got your top guys. You got your Kelsey. You got your Mark Andrews, you got your Kittles, the elite talents of the groups, and they all finish in the top 5 there. The guys that I mentioned, Kelsey, Hawkinson, Kittle, Mark Andrews, Evan Ingram, to round out the top 10. Top 5. But when you look at Kelsey, 316 fantasy points, and you compare him to the guy that was behind him, you got Hawkinson at 215, and you got George Kittle at 200. There's a big gap between Kelsey and everybody else. There typically is every year. And Mark Andrews, 190 points, not performing well at all this year. So a lot of disappointment here, even with guys that finish in the top 5, not putting up top numbers and numbers that you really want. Like I said, Mark Andrews, 190 fantasy points. Again, we're talking PPR. That put Mark Andrews as the 4th tight end. Now, let's put it in perspective amongst wide receivers, okay? 190 points, in comparison to wide receiver. Well, Juju was 27th amongst wide receivers at 185, and Garrett Wilson was 197 points, and Zay Jones was 198 points. Chris Olave 198. So, and Olave finished 24th amongst wide receivers. So, a top 4 tight end is putting up top 22 finisher at the wide receiver position. Does that make sense? So, this is why I don't draft early at tight end. Unless you get Kelsey. He's had amazing years every year. When is his decline coming? It's crazy. I mean, he's due for a decline eventually, right? It could be any year. It's like playing fantasy roulette. But either way, tight end here, when I look at the bust of the year at the tight end position, I mean, they all did so bad. It's hard to pick one. Higbee, finished 6th. Goddard finished 11th. Gerald Everett, I'm not expecting much out of these guys anyway. You could make an argument that Njoku finished 16th amongst tight ends. Darren Waller, 84 points, a guy that people thought were high on. And here's the crazy thing. People were high on Waller and Adams. And I said, it's impossible for both these guys to finish top 10. Waller obviously didn't finish there, finished 31st, but a lot of people were still high on Waller. But Kyle Pitts, how can I forget Kyle Pitts? He's so down on this list here that I forgot about him. Kyle Pitts finishing 33rd amongst tight ends, and I thought he'd have a good year. A lot of people did because they didn't really have a true wide receiver one. They had Drake London as a rookie coming in, but Kyle Pitts, what a disappointing year. Played 10 games, got hurt, 75 fantasy points, PPR. Yeah, I would say Kyle Pitts is definitely the bust of the year at the tight end position. I don't think there's a close second. So let's go back here. So we got Kyle Pitts here at the tight end position. And again, in the comments below, let me know. I want to get the verdict here. We got Kyle Pitts. We got Deebo Samuel here, who really disappointed me this year, finishing 36th. I would say Deebo Samuel has to be in conversation for a big-time bust. Playing 13 games, just not performing. But again, I kind of expected that. You could make an argument for Keenan Allen. Again, am I missing somebody here? I mean, let me just take a look here if I'm missing anybody. There was a big-time bust. Again, Mooney, but again, our expectations weren't as high. Renfro, but again, with Adams there, we weren't expecting much out of him. I'm just trying to see if there's anyone else I'm missing here. I would have to go Deebo here as one of the guys that is a big-time bust. Again, I'm looking really down low on this list. Yeah, I mean, Deebo Samuel. Let me know if you guys have a different conversation here. I mean, Alan Lazard, Adam Thielen didn't do good. Juju sucked. Tons of guys that underperformed. But I would say Deebo because his capital was so high, right? Running back, again, I got to go here with Jonathan Taylor. To me, it's not a debate here. First overall pick across the board, except for my lists. I don't really do lists. I do 16 rounds, and I told you to fade him because he's going to decline. But I'm going to go here, Jonathan Taylor, as the biggest bust at the running back position. DeAndre Swift is a second consideration there. And then at the quarterback position, I'm going to stick with my guns here. And it's a guy that I told you to draft as a backup is Russell Wilson. And he finished 16th amongst quarterbacks. He still beat out guys like Kyler Murray, Derek Carr, Dak Prescott, Marcus Mariota, Jimmy Garoppolo, Ryan Tannehill, Matt Ryan, Kenny Pickett, Baker Mayfield, Mitch Trubisky, and all the other guys. But the point I'm trying to make is it's still like we had high expectations. Even the Broncos did. Everybody did. And he completely let us down. So I'd say Russell Wilson, Jonathan Taylor, Deebo Samuel, and Kyle Pitts. And this is debatable. This is subjective, right, to some degree, because you can make an argument this way or that way. But those are the guys that I think were the biggest bust at each position. And then you've got your honorable seconds. You got your DeAndre Swift, right, at the running back position. You got Alan Lazard. You got other guys at the wide receiver, right? So in the comments below, guys, let me know what you guys think. But overall, I would say Jonathan Taylor is the biggest bust for fantasy football 2022, without a doubt. And I'm so grateful that 16 Rounders and the Council Nation avoided him this year and projected and saw that a guaranteed decline based on a pinnacle year is viable, and it's going to happen. And also Cooper Kupp as well. Sorry, how did I forget Cooper Kupp? I mean, you could factor in injury, but Cooper Kupp also a big time bust at the wide receiver position. So, let me know. Is it Taylor? Is it Kupp? Is it Debo? Is it, Swift? Who is the biggest bust overall in 2022? And who is the biggest bust at each position? Love to get your feedback, guys. Okay. If you enjoyed the video, guys, smash thumbs up. Appreciate it. Comment below and share this with your friends. And let's have a discussion about the biggest bust of 2022. And I'm going to be rolling out the 2023 content like a crazy person. It's coming out. All right, guys, we'll talk soon. 2023 is here. Going hard. Subscribe. I'm out.